An idea, dim at first as a star on the horizon's verge, struggling through vapors, but growing each second brighter and clearer, dawned upon his mind. All then was over. His prophetic soul had proved false in its presumed foreknowledge. Defeat, dishonor, disgrace tracked his steps. To lead his troops forth, and then to redeem them at Henry's hand by the conditionless surrender of himself, was the thought, child of despair and self-devotion, that, still struggling with the affections and weaknesses of his nature, presented itself, not yet full-fledged, but about to become so. He had been several times interrupted during his meditations by the arrival of scouts, with various reports of the situation and proceedings of the enemy. Richard, better than these untaught recruits, knew the meaning of the various operations. As if on a map, he saw the stationing of a large and powerful army in expectation of battle, and was aware how incapable he was to cope with their numbers and force. At last Astley announced the arrival of 2 men. One was a Fleming, known to Richard as one of Laling's men, but the fellow was stupidly drunk. The other was an English peasant. "Please your worship," he said, "I am this man's guide, and must act as his interpreter besides. Nothing would serve the spongy fellow, but he must swallow ale at every tavern on the way." "Speak then," said Richard. "What is the purport of his journey?" "Please you, sir, last night 300 of them came right pop upon us afore we were aware. Sore afraid they made us with their tall iron-shafted poles, steel caps, and short swords, calling each one for bread and beer." "Do you mean," cried the prince, his eye brightening as he spoke, "that 300 men, soldiers, armed like yonder fellow, are landed in England?" So the countryman averred, and that even now they were but at the distance of 20 miles from Richard's encampment. They were still advancing, when the report was spread that the prince's forces were dispersed, himself taken prisoner. The rustic drew from the Fleming's pocket a letter, in French, signed by Schwartz, a son of him who fell at Stoke, a man in high favor with the Lady Margaret of Burgundy. It said how he had been dispatched by her grace to his succor, how intelligence of the large army of Henry and his defeat had so terrified his men, that they refused to proceed, nay, by the next morning would take their way back to Poole, where they had landed, unless Richard himself came to reassure them, and to lead them on. Every word of the letter lighted up to forgotten joy young Richard's elastic spirit. With these men to aid him, giving weight and respectability to his powers, he might hope to enforce the conditions of his challenge. All must be decided on the morrow. That very hour he would set forth, to return before morning with these welcome succors. It was near midnight. His camp was still. The men, in expectation of the morrow's struggle, had retired to repose. Their leaders had orders to visit their commander in his tent at the hour which now the empty hourglass told was come. Hastily, eagerly, Richard announced the arrival of these German mercenaries. He directed them to accompany him, that with some show of attendance he might present himself to Schwartz. The camp was not to be disturbed. 2 or 3 men alone among them were awakened, and ordered to keep guard. In 5 hours assuredly he must return. In a brief space of time, the troop who were to accompany him, Heron, Skelton, Awater, and Astley with some 40 more, led their horses to his tent in silence. There were few lights through all the camp. Their honest hearts which beat within slept, while he was awake to succor and save them. This was Richard's last thought, as, mounted on his good steed, he led the way across the dim heath towards Yeovil. It was such a night, as is frequent at the end of September. A warm but furious west wind tore along the sky, shaking the dark tresses of the tress, and chasing the broad shadows of the clouds across the plains. The moon, at the beginning of her 3rd quarter, sped through the sky with rapid silvery wings, now cutting the dark, sea-like ether, now plunging deep amidst the clouds, now buried in utter darkness, anon spreading a broad halo among the thinner woof of vapors. The guide was at the prince's side. Heron, upon his short, sturdy pony, was just behind. Skelton tried to get his tall mare to an even pace with Richard's horse, but she fell back continually. The rushing, howling wind and rustling trees drowned the clatter of the hoofs. They reached the extreme edge of the common. Richard turned his head. The lights of his little camp burnt dim in the moonshine. Its poor apparel of tents was lost in the distance. They entered a dark lane, and lost sight of every trace of it. Still they rode fleetly on. Night and the obscure shapes of night around. Holy, blinding, all-seeing night. When we feel the power of the omnipotent as if immediately in contact with us. When religion fills the soul, and our very fears are unearthly. When familiar images assume an unknown power to thrill our hearts, and the winds and trees and shapeless clouds have a voice not their own, to speak of all that we dream or imagine beyond our actual life. Through embowered lanes, whose darkness seemed thick and palpable, over open, moonshiny fields, where the airy chase of clouds careered in dimmer shapes upon the earth, Richard rode forward, fostering newly awakened hope, glad in the belief that while he saved all who depended on him, he would not prove a mere victim led in tame submission, an unrighteous sacrifice to the evil spirit of the world. Chapter 46. A prisoner. Art thou he traitor, that with treason vile hast slain my men in this unmanly manner, and now triumphest in the piteous spoil of these poor folk, whose souls with black dishonor and foul defame do deck thy bloody banner? The meed whereof shall shortly be thy shame, and wretched end which still attendeth on her. With that himself to battle he did frame, so did his 40 yeomen which there with him came. Spencer. Some miles to the east of Yeovil, there was a deep stream, whose precipitous banks were covered by a thick underwood that almost concealed the turbid waters, which undermined and bared the twisted and gnarled roots of the various overhanging trees or shrubs. The left side of the stream was bounded by an abrupt hill, at the foot of which was a narrow pathway. On the green acclivity flourished a beech grove, whose roots were spread in many directions to catch the soil, while their trunks, some almost horizontal, were all fantastically grown, and the fairy tracery of the foliage shed such soft, mellowed, checkered light as must incline the heart of the wanderer beneath the leafy bower to delicious musings. Now the moon silvered the trees, and sometimes glimmered on the waters, whose murmurs contended with the wind that sung among the boughs. And was this all? A straggling moonbeam fell on something bright amid the bushes, and a deep voice cried, "Jack of the wind, if thou canst not get to thicker cover, pluck darnels to cover that cursed steel cap of thine." "Hush," repeated another lower voice, "your bawling is worse than his headpiece, you outroar the wind. How high the moon is and our friends not come, he will be here before them. Hark a bell. Matins, by the fiend, may he seize that double-tongued knave. I much suspect Master Frion, I know him of old. He cannot mar us now, though it be he who made this ambushment. Oh, by your leave, he has the trick of it and could spring a mine in the broadest way. He can turn and twist and show more faces than a die. He this morn, I know the laugh, there is mischief in tea. But your worship now, what can he do? Do darken the moon, set these trees alive and dancing. Do so play the will-o'-the-wisp that the king shall be on Pendennis and the duke at Greenwich, and each fancy he is within bowshot of the other. Do ask the devil what is in his compact, for he is but the merry Andrew of Dr. Frion. Hush. It is he, said the other speaker. A breathless pause ensued. The wind swept through the trees, another sound. Its monotonous recurrence showed that it was a dashing waterfall, and yet again it grew louder. It is he. No gad's mercy, it comes westward. Close, my merry fellows, close, and mind the word. Close, for we have but half our number, and yet he may escape. Again the scene sank into silence and darkness, such silence as is nature's own, whose voice is ever musical, such darkness as the embowering trees and vast island clouds made, dimming and drinking up the radiance of the moon. The stillness was broken by the tramp of horses drawing near, men's voices mingled with the clatter, and now several cavaliers entered the defile. They rode in some disorder, and so straggling, that it was probable that many of their party lagged far behind. The principal horseman had reached midway the ravine, when suddenly a tree, with all its growth of green and tangled boughs, fell right across the path. The clatter of the fall deafened the screech which accompanied it, for one rider was overthrown. It was succeeded by a flight of arrows from concealed archers. "Ride for your lives," cried Richard. But his path was crossed by 6 horsemen, while starting from the coppice, a band of near 40 men engaged with the van of his troop, who tried to wheel about. Some escaped, most fell. With his sword drawn, the prince rushed at his foremost enemy. It was a mortal struggle for life and liberty, for hatred and revenge. Richard was the better swordsman, but his horse was blown and half sunk upon his haunches when pressed closely by the adversary. Richard saw his danger, and yet his advantage, for his foe, overeager to press him down, forgot the ward. He rose on his stirrups and grasped his sword with both hands, when a blow from behind, a coward's blow from a battle-axe, struck him. It was repeated, and he fell lifeless on the earth. Sickness and faintness, and throbbing pain were the first tokens of life that visited his still failing sense. Sight and the power of motion seemed to have deserted him, but memory reviving told him that he was a prisoner. Moments were stretched to ages while he strove to collect his sensations. Still it was night. The view of fields and uplands and of the varied moonlit sky grew upon his languid senses. He was still on horseback, bound to the animal, and supported on either side by men. As his movements communicated his returning strength, one of these fellows rode to impart the tidings to their leader, while the other stayed to guide his horse. The word gallop was called aloud, and he was urged along at full speed, while the sudden motion almost threw him back into his swoon. Dawn, which at first seemed to add to the dimness and indistinctness of the landscape, struggling through the clouds, and paling the moon, slowly stole upon them. The prince became sufficiently alive to make observations. He and his fellow prisoners were 5 in number only, their guards were 10. Foremost among them was one whom, in whatever guise, he could not mistake. Each feeling in Richard's heart stimulated him to abhor that man, yet he pitied him more. Gallant, bold Robin, the frolicsome page, the merry-witted sharer of 1,000 pleasures. Time, thou art a thief. How base a thief, when thou stealest not only our friends, our youth, our hopes, but besides our innocence, giving us in the place of light-hearted confidence, guile, distrust, the consciousness of evil deeds. In these thoughts, Richard drew the coloring of the picture, from the fresh and vivid tints that painted his own soul. Clifford's breast had perhaps never been free from the cares of guilt. He had desired honor, he had loved renown, but the early development of passion and of talent had rendered him, even in boyhood, less single-hearted than Richard now. Clifford was triumphant. He possessed Monina's beloved, the cause of his disgrace bound, a prisoner and wounded. Why then did pain distort his features and passion flush his brow? No triumph laughed in his eye or sat upon his lip. He hated the prince, but he hated and despised himself. He played a dastardly and a villain's part, and shame awaited even success. The notoriety and infamy that attended on him, exaggerated as those things usually are in his own eyes, made him fear to meet, in the neighboring villages or towns, any noble cavalier who might recognize him. Even if he saw a party of horsemen on the road, he turned out of it, and thus got entangled among bypaths in an unfrequented part of the country. They continued the same fast career for several hours, till they entered a wild dark forest, where the interminable branches of the old oaks met high-arched overhead, and the paths were beset with fern and underwood. The road they took was at first a clear and open glade, but it quickly narrowed and branched off in various directions. They followed one of its windings till it abruptly closed. The leader then reined in, and Clifford's voice was heard. Years had elapsed since it had met Richard's ear. The mere, as it were, abstract idea of Clifford was mingled with crime and hate. His voice, his manner, his look were associated with protestations of fidelity, or dearer still, the intercourse of friendship and youthful gaiety. No wonder that it seemed a voice from the grave to betrayed York. "Halloo!" cried Clifford, "Clim of the Lynn, my merry man, thou art to track us through the New Forest to Southampton." "Please your knightship," said a shaggy-headed fellow, "our way is clear, I am at home now. But by St. George, we must halt." A 30 miles ride since matins, his fast unbroken, would have made Robin Hood a laggard. "What would you eat here?" cried Clifford. A stew of canary and beef were blessings for the nonce, but we must get out of this accursed wilderness into more Christian neighborhood before we find our hostelry. 1149 of the Lynn grinned. "To a poor forester," said he, "the greenwood is a royal inn. Vert and venison, your worship, sound more savory than 4 smoky walls, and a platter of beef brought in mine host's left hand, while his right already says pay. They would feed me with mine own venison in way of courtesy, even as the lion heart, my namesake and ancestor, was feasted of old. Mine each acre, each rood, and every noble stag that pastures thereon. But I am not so free as they, and mine though this wild would be, I must thank an outlaw ere I dine upon my own." Thus thought Richard, and at that moment, with his limbs aching through their bondage, and with throbbing temples, liberty in the free forest seemed worth more than a kingdom. The bright sun was high, the sky serene, the merry birds were caroling in the brake, the forest basked in noonday while the party wound along the shady path beneath. The languid frame of York revived, at first to pain alone, for memory was serpent-fanged. What birdlime was this to ensnare the royal eagle? But soon despair, which had flapped her harpy wings across his face, blinding him, fled away, hope awoke, and in her train, schemes of escape, freedom, and a renewal of the struggle. Meanwhile they threaded many a green pathway, and after another hour's ride, arrived at the opening of a wide grassy dell. A deer, a stag of 10, leaped from his ferny bed and bounded away. A herd of timid fawns, just visible in the distance, hurried into the thicket, while many a bird flew from the near sprays. Here the party halted. First they unbitted their steeds, and then dismounted the prisoners, binding them for security's sake to a tree. Richard was spared this degradation, for still he was a prince in Clifford's eyes, and his extreme physical weakness, caused by his blow, made even the close watching him superfluous. He was lifted from his horse and placed upon the turf, and there left. While some of his guards went to seek and slay their repast, others led their animals to a brook which murmured near. All were variously and busily employed. Clifford alone remained. He called for water. Evidently he was more weary than he chose to own. He took off his casque. His features were ghastly. There was a red streak upon his brow, which was knit as if to endurance, and his lips were white and quivering. Never had crime visited with such torment ill-fated man. He looked to Cain after the murder. The Abel he had killed was his own fair fame, the ancestral honor of his race. How changed from when Richard last saw him, but 2 years before. His hair was nearly gray, his eyes hollow, his cheeks fallen in. Yet though thin to emaciation, he had lost that delicacy and elegance of feature that had characterized him. Almost without reflection, forgetting his own position in painful compassion, the prince exclaimed, "Thou art an unhappy man, Sir Robert." The knight replied with a ghastly smile which he meant to be disdainful. "But now," continued Richard, "while thy visor screened thy face, I was on the point of taunting thee as a coward, of defying thee to mortal combat. But thou art miserable and broken-hearted, and no match for me." Clifford's eyes glared, his hand was upon his sword's hilt. He recollected himself, replying, "You cannot provoke me, sir, you are my prisoner. Thy victim, Robin, though once saved by thee, but that is past, and there is no return. The blood of Stanley, and of 100 other martyrs, rolls between us. I conquer my own nature, when even for a moment I look upon their murderer." The weakness of the prince gave a melancholy softness to his voice and manner. The deep pity he felt for his fallen friend imparted a seraphic expression to his clear, open countenance. Clifford writhed with pain. Clifford, who, though not quick to feel for others, was all sense and sensitiveness for himself. And how often in the world do we see sensibility attributed to individuals, whose show of feeling arises from excessive susceptibility to their own sorrows and injuries. Clifford wished to answer to go away. He was spellbound. His cowering look first animated Richard to an effort, which a moment before he would have ridiculed. "Wherefore," said he, "have you earned all men's hate and your own to boot? Are you more honored and loved than in Brussels? Scorn tracks you in your new career, and worst of all, you despise yourself." By St. Sathanas and his brood, fiercely burst from the knight, then he bit his lip and was silent. "Yet, Clifford, son of a noble father, spare yourself this crowning sin. I have heard from travelled men that in heathenesse the unbaptized miscreant is true to him whose hospitality he has shared. There was a time when my eyes brightened when I saw you, when the name of Robin was a benediction to be. You have changed it for the direst curse. Yours are no common crimes. Foremost in the chronicles, your name will stand as a type and symbol of ingratitude and treason, written with the blood of Fitzwater and Stanley. But this is not all. The young and defenseless you destroy, you have stood with uplifted dagger over the couch of a sleeping man." Clifford had fostered the belief that this vilest act of his life, to which he had been driven rather by fierce revenge than hope of reward, was a secret. A moment before he had advanced with hasty and furious glances towards his enemy. Scarcely had the words passed York's lips, than a kind of paralysis came over him. His knees knocked together, his arms fell nerveless to his side. "O man," continued York, "arouse thy sleeping faculties. Bid the fiend who tortures thee avaunt. Even now at the word, he feels his power over thy miserable soul waver. By him who died on the cross, I conjure him to leave thee. Say thou Amen to my adjuration, and he departs. Cast off the huge burthen of guilt, deliver thy soul into the care of holy men. As thy first act depart this spot, leave me. It is I who command, Richard of York, thy sovereign. Begone, or kneeling at my feet, seek the grace thou hast so dearly forfeited." For a moment it almost seemed as if the wretched man were about to obey, but at the moment his groom came from the spring, where he had been watering his horse. The sight of another human being to witness his degradation awoke him to frenzy. He called aloud, "How now, sirrah? Why, unbit dragon, bring him here, I must be gone." "He can't carry your honor a mile," said the fellow. "A miracle," cried Richard. "You repent, Sir Robert." As Lucifer in hell looked to the prisoner, Clifford vaulted on his horse. His head was bare, his eyes wild and bloodshot. Clapping spurs to the jaded animal's side, he put him to his speed and was gone. "His fit is on him," cried his attendant, "and what are we to do? He rides a race with the fiend, leaving us to do both their works." More whisperingly he muttered, "Hold Duke Richard in bonds against his will may I not. He gave me gold in Flanders, he is a king's son and a belted knight, and I a poor servitor." Richard had conceived a faint hope of working on Clifford's manifest remorse, and enlisting him again, under the banner of the White Rose. His wonder was great when he saw him flying through the forest with uncovered head and disheveled hair, the bridle of his horse in the groom's hand, while the wearied animal, spurred to speed, threw up his head, snorting with fear. Not a moment was to be lost. The prince flew to his comrades in captivity. Already Heron and Awater had their bonds cut by the sword of which he possessed himself. Heron, in whose 2 arms lay his chief strength, and Awater, at home in a fray, fired with the desire of liberty and life, got speedy hold of battle-axes and stood at bay. Skelton, the next made free, began to run, but finding his flight was solitary, he secured a bow and arrows, and betook himself to a short, sure aim from behind a tree, while he offered up another sigh to the memory of Trerafe. Astley threw himself foremost before his master, unarmed. The weapons of their guard were chiefly in a heap, and these, defended by the enfranchised prisoners, were useless to them. Headed by Clifford's groom, who stood in salutary awe of shedding royal blood, a parley commenced. He entreated Richard to submit. He told him that the whole country was in arms against him, his way back to his army beset, the sea-coast strictly guarded. What then could he do? Die in arms and at liberty. "Stand back, sirs. What would you do with me? Your guilty captain has deserted you. Is there one of your number who will raise his accursed weapon against a king and a knight?" Clym of the Lynn, and another outlawed forester, Clifford in mustering a troop had gathered together all manner of wild companions, now appeared dragging in a fat buck. Clym grinned when he saw the altered state of things. "Come, my men," he said, "it is not for us to fight King Henry's battles. The more majesties there be in England, the merrier for us, I trow, and the wider and freer the range of the King of the New Forest. Put up your rapiers, and let us feast like brethren. Ye may fall to with your weapons afterwards. Or, if it please your grace to trust to me, I will lead you where none of the king's men will follow." "Wilt thou guide me back to Taunton?" asked the prince. "Not for my cap full of rose nobles," replied the outlaw. "The way is beset, and trust me your worship's men are scattered far and wide ere this. You are a tall fellow, and I should ill like to see you in their gripe. Be one of us, you shall be king of the greenwood shade, and a merrier, freer monarch than he who lives at Westminster." Hark! The word, spoken in a voice of alarm, made the party all ear. There was a distant tramp, every now and then a breaking of bushes, and a whole herd of deer came bounding up the glade in flight. A forester who had rambled further than the rest rushed back, saying, "60 yeomen of the royal guard. They are coming hitherward. Sir Harry de Vere leads them, I know his bright bay horse." Away. Chapter 47. A Dilemmas. He might have dwelt in green forest, under the shadows green, and have kept both him and us at rest, out of all trouble and teen. Old Ballad. It had been the policy of Richard's captors to have remained to deliver up their prisoners to a stronger force, but most of them were outlaws by profession, who held the king's men in instinctive horror. These were the first to fly. The panic spread. Those who had no cause to fear fled because they saw others do so. In a moment the sward was cleared of all save the prisoners, who hastily bridled their horses, and followed York down a narrow path into a glen, in an opposite direction from the approaching troop. With what speed they made their way through the forest, penetrating its depths, till they got completely entangled in its intricacies. They proceeded for several hours, but their jaded horses one by one foundered. They were in the most savage part of the wood. There was no beginning nor end to the prospect of knotted trunks, which lifted their vast leafy burthen into the air. Here was safety and needful repose. Richard, animated to a sudden effort, could now hardly keep his seat. The state of their animals was imperative for a halt. So here, in a wild brake, they alighted near a running brook, and here Awater slew a buck, while Astley and Skelton unbridled their horses, and all set about preparing a most needful repast. Evening stole upon them before it was concluded. The slant sunbeams lay in golden glory on the twisted ivy-grown trunks, and bathed the higher foliage in radiance. By the time their appetites were satisfied, Heron and Skelton were discovered to be in a sound sleep. It were as well to follow their example. Neither men nor horses could proceed without repose. Darkness also afforded best safety for traveling. It was agreed that they should pursue their way at midnight. And so, stretched on the grassy soil, peace and the beauty of nature around them, each gave himself up to a slumber which, at that extremity of fatigue, needed no courting. All slept save the prince. He lay in a state of feverish disquietude, looking at the sky through the leafy tracery overhead, till night masked and confused every object. Darkest thoughts thronged his mind. Loss of honor, desertion of friends, the fate of his poor men. He was to have devoted himself to them, but a stream, driven by a thundering avalanche from its course, had as much power as he to oppose the circumstances that had brought him from his camp near Taunton to this secluded spot. For an interval he gave himself up to a tumult of miserable ideas, till from the grim troop some assumed a milder aspect, some a brighter hue, and after long and painful consideration, he arranged such a plan as promised at least to vindicate his own name, and to save the lives of his adherents. Calmed by these thoughts, soothed to repose by the gentle influence of a south wind, and the sweet monotony of rustling leaves and running water, he sank at last into a dreamless sleep. A whispering of voices was the first thing that struck his wakening sense. It was quite dark. "Is Master O'Water come back?" asked Heron. "I am here," replied the Irishman. "Hast discovered aught?" "That the night is dark, and the forest wide," replied O'Water. "Had we a planet to guide us we might hope to reach its skirts. We are worse off than the Spanish admiral on the western sea, for the compass was a star without a cloud to him." "Saint Mary save us," said, or rather whined poor Skelton, "our fortunes are slit from top to toe, and no patchwork will make them whole." "There is hope at the mouth of a culverin," said O'Water, "or at the foot of the gallows, so that a man be true to himself. I have weathered a worse day, when the Maccarthys swore to revenge themselves on the Roches." "And by Our Lady's grace," interrupted Richard, "shall again, worthy mayor. My good fellows, fear nothing, I will save you. The ocean cannot be many miles off, for the sun set at our right hand and blinded our eyes through the day. The wind by its mildness is southerly, we will face it. When once we reach the seaside, the shore of the free, wide ocean, Tudor's power stops short, and ye are safe. Of myself there will then be time to think. Say, shall we proceed now, or give another hour to repose?" All were eager to start, slowly leading their horses through the tangled paths they could find, the quarter whence the wind blew, their only guide. Morning found them toiling on, but morning diminished half their labors, and as the birds twittered and the east gleamed there, spirits rose to meet and conquer danger. O'Water was in his native element, that of hairbreadth escape and peril. As to Heron and Skelton, they might have flagged, but for Richard, he flattered their pride, raised their hopes, making weariness and danger a plaything and a jest. As the sun mounted in the sky, their horses showed many a sign of weariness, and in spite of a store of venison, which the careful Skelton had brought away with him, they needed refreshment. Each mile lengthened to 10. Each glade grew interminable in their eyes, and the wide forest seemed to possess all England in its extent. Could the prince's body have conquered his mind, the white rose had indeed drooped. He was parched with fever, and this, preying on his brain, made him the victim of conflicting thoughts. His heart, his imagination were in his deserted camp. Even fair Catherine, awaiting tidings of him in her far retreat, had not such power to awaken anguish in his heart as the idea of Henry's vengeance exercised on his faithful, humble friends, whose father and protector he had called himself. There was disease in the fire and rapidity with which these ideas coursed through his mind. With a strong will he overcame them, bent on accomplishing his present purpose and rescuing these chief rebels, whose lives were most endangered, before he occupied himself with the safety of the rest. At length, at noon, his quick ear caught a heavy, distant roar. The trees had begun to be more scattered. They reached the verge of the forest. They were too weary to congratulate each other. Before them was a rising ground which bounded their view. Some straggling cottages crowned the height. Slowly they reached the hilltop and there beheld stormy ocean, clipping in the circular coast with watery girdle. At a crow's flight it might be a mile distant. A few huts and a single black boat spotted in one place the else desert beach. A south wind swept the sea, and vast surges broke upon the sands. All looked bleak and deserted. They stopped at a cottage door, inquiring the road. They heard there was one, which went 3 miles about, but that the plain at their feet was intersected by wide ditches, which their fagged animals could not leap. Moreover, what hope of putting out to sea, in opposition to the big noisy waves which the wind was hurrying towards shore. It were safest and best to take a short repose in this obscure village. Heron and Skelton entered the poor inn, while Richard waited on his horse, striving to win him by caresses to taste the food he at first refused. Heron, who was warm-hearted with all his bluster, brought the prince out a flagon of excellent wine, such as by some chance, it might be a wreck, the tide had wafted from the opposite coast. Richard was too ill to drink. But as he stood, his arm on his poor steed's neck, the creature looked wistfully up in his face, averting his mouth from the proffered grain. Half-playfully his master held out to him the wide-mouthed flagon, and he drank with such eagerness that Richard vowed he should have another bottle, and buying the host's consent with gold, filled a large can from the wine-cask. The beast drank and had he been a Christian man, could not have appeared more refreshed. The prince, forgetful of his pains, was amusing himself thus, when Skelton, pale and gasping, came from the house and, voiceless through fear, laid one hand on his leader's arm, and with the other pointed. Too soon the hapless fugitive saw to what he called his attention. Along the shore of the sea, a moving body was perceptible, approaching towards them from west to east, which soon showed itself to be a troop of horse soldiers. Richard gave speedy order that his friends should assemble and mount, while he continued to watch the proceedings of the enemy. They were about 200 strong. They arrived at the huts on the beach, and the prince perceived that they were making dispositions to leave a part of their number behind. 50 men were selected, and posted as patrol. The rest then moved forward, still towards the east. By this time the remaining fugitives had mounted and gathered in one spot. The villagers also were collecting. Skelton's teeth chattered. He asked an old woman if there were any sanctuary near. "Aye, by Our Lady is there," replied the dame. 16 miles along the coast is the monastery of Beaulieu, a sanctuary for princes, by the same token that the Lady Margaret, St. Henry's queen, lived safely there in spite of the wicked Yorkists, who would have taken her precious life. Richard turned quickly round as the woman spoke and heard her words, but again his eyes were attracted to the coast. As the troop were proceeding along the sands, the little knot of horsemen perched upon the hill caught the attention of a soldier. He rode along the lines and spoke to the commanding officer. A halt ensued. "We are lost," cried Skelton. "We are taken, Lord. Lord, will they grant us our lives?" "These trees are tempting, and apt for hanging," said a water, with the air of a connoisseur. "Oh, for Beaulieu, let us ride," exclaimed Skelton, longing to go, yet afraid of separating himself from his companions. Still the prince watched the movements of the adverse party. 10 men were detached and began to advance inland. "Oh, dear my lord," cried Astley, "betake yourself to the forest. There are 1,000 ways of baffling these men. I will meet them and put them to fault. Hide, for my lady's sake, ride." "Master Astley is a cunning gentleman," said Skelton. "Our horses are ory, and a little craft would help us mightily." Still Richard's eyes were fixed on the troopers. The men advanced as far as a broad, deep stream which intersected the plain. Here they hesitated. One of the best mounted leaped across. The others drew back, seeking along the steep, shelving banks for a ford or a narrowing of the stream. The eyes of the troop on the shore were now turned upon their comrades. "Our time is come," cried Richard, "back to the forest." One step took them down the other side of the hill, hiding sea and beach and enemy from their eyes, and screening them also from observation. They soon reached the forest and entered its shade, and then proceeded along just within its skirts. "Whither?" respectfully a water asked, after Skelton had for some time been muttering many a hint concerning sanctuary. "To Beaulieu," said the prince. "We are barred out from the ocean, we are beset at land. The little island yclept sanctuary is all that is left to ye. God speed us safely hither." Richard's horse was lively and refreshed after his generous draught, but these of the others flagged. The prince exerted himself to keep up the spirits of all. He rallied Skelton, spoke comfort to Astley, and good hope to Heron. The sturdy apprentice of danger, flight, and trouble awater treated it all as a matter of course. Even hanging, if it so chanced, was but a likely accident. The others needed more encouragement. Astley feared for his lord, even to an appearance of timidity, which, though disinterested, had a bad effect on the others. Heron complained bitterly that his dinner had been left unfinished, while the poor tailor, now fancying that he would run away from all, now fearful of solitary misadventure, kept up a garrulous harangue, of which terror was the burthen and the sum. Richard's voice was cheerful, his manner gay, but placing his hand on Astley, it felt scorching. Every moment it required more energy to throw off the clinging lethargy that fell upon him. It was again evening, a circumstance that had caused them to enter deeper into the forest, and it was to be feared they had lost their way. All were weary, all, save Richard, hungry. The breeze had died away, the air was oppressive, and more it felt like a load intolerable to the prince's burning brow. Night began to close in so very dark that the horses refused to go forward. Suddenly a roaring sound arose, which was not the sea, and but that the atmosphere was so still, the wanderers would have said that it was a fierce wind among the trees. Such must it be, for now it came nearer. Like living things, the vast giants of the forest tossed their branches furiously, and entire darkness and sudden pouring rain revealed the tempest, which their leafy prison had before hidden. All was so instantaneous that it would seem that nature was undergoing some great revulsion in her laws. The prince's horse snorted and reared, while Waters dashed furiously on, striking against a tree, and throwing his rider, from whose lips there escaped a shriek. What would have been the last overflowing drop in the bitter cup to a weak mind, restored Richard, lassitude and despondency vanished. In an instant he was off his horse at Waters' side, speaking in his own cheerful, kind voice. "Waste no moment on me," cried the generous mayor. "My leg is broken, I can go no further, speed you, your highness, to the sanctuary." This was the end of hope, the raging storm, the disabled man, dark night, and Richard's resolve not to desert his follower, all were causes of terror and of despair. A voice in the wood was heard calling aloud. No answer could be returned. It was repeated, and Astley went forward to reconnoiter. Even an enemy were help in such disaster, yet Heron and Skelton implored him to remain. Another halloo Richard answered, for he recognized Astley's voice, who in the dark could not find his way back. He came at last, accompanied by a monk. This was heaven's favor revealed, for the holy man was a hermit, and his poor cell was near. Poor indeed was it, built with logs, the interstices filled with mud. A bed of dried leaves was nearly all the furniture. The hermit had gone on first, and lit a torch. As they might, they bore along poor Owater, and placed him in his agony on the low couch. The hermit looked inquisitively on all the party, neglecting to answer Skelton, who asked for the 100th time the distance to Beaulieu. Richard still occupied himself with the mayor, endeavoring to discover if the limb were broken. "By your leave, your grace," said the hermit, "I am somewhat of a chirurgeon. I boast of my cures of horses, and have saved a Christian man ere now." Scarcely did the prince remember to wonder at the title by which the unknown addressed him. By Our Lady's love he besought him to attend to his friend. "Trust me," said the hermit, "I will not fail, but you, my lord, must not tarry here. The forest is beset with troops, but for night and storm you would hardly attain Beaulieu in safety. It is but 2 miles distant. I will guide your highness thither and then return to your follower. Have faith in me, my lord. I have served your royal uncle and was enlisted under your banner last year in Kent. I made a shift to escape and took sanctuary, but the stone walls of a monastery are little better than those of a prison, so I betook me to the woods. Oh, I beseech you, waste no time. I will return to your follower. He is safe till then." "Direct us, and I will thank you," replied Richard, "but you shall not desert your patient even for a moment." There was no alternative but to comply. The man gave as clear instructions as he might, and Richard again set forward with his diminished party. They were long entangled by trees, and it was now quite night. The excitement over, the prince had drooped again. Even this interval was full of peril. A tramp of steeds was heard. They drew up among the trees, a party of horsemen passed. One, could it be the voice of the subtle Frion, said, "At the end of this glade we shall see the abbey spires." Well, I know the same, for when Queen Margaret. This speaker was succeeded by a woman's voice. Yet greater wonder, she spoke in Spanish in unforgotten accents. Richard's heart stood still as he heard them, but soon both voice and tramp of steeds grew faint, and his brain, becoming more and more bewildered, allowed no thought to enter, save the one fixed there even in delirium. The fugitives continued to linger in this spot until it was probable that the travelers should have arrived. True to the information they had overheard, the forest opened at the end of the glade into a leafy amphitheater. An avenue was opposite, which led to the abbey gates, whose Gothic spires, buttresses and carved arches rose above the tufted trees in dark masses. One end of the building was illuminated. That was the church, and the pealing organ stole mournfully on the night, sounding a miserere. The chanting of the monks mingled with the harmonious swell, adding that pathos, that touch of solemn, unutterable sentiment, which perhaps no music, save that of the human voice, possesses. Richard's companions were rough-suited, vulgar-minded. but they were Catholic and religious men, and were awestruck by this voice from heaven reaching them thus in their desolation, a voice promising safety and repose to their harassed, wearied bodies. A few steps carried them to the very spot. The bell was rung, the gate was opened, sanctuary was claimed and afforded. Skelton sprang forward, the other two hung back, but on a sign from Richard, they also passed the sacred threshold. "Farewell, my friends," he said. "A short farewell. Astley, I charge you wait for me. Sir Priest, close the gate." The word was said, the order obeyed, Richard was left alone in darkness. "Now for my task, for my poor trusty fellows. The work of murder cannot yet have begun, my life pays for all. Yet a while bear me up, thou fainting spirit, desert not Richard's breast till his honor be redeemed." Vain prayer. I must repose, he thought. It is of no avail to urge nature beyond herself, a few minutes and I am strong. He dismounted, and with a sensation of delicious relief, threw himself at his length on the wet grass, pressing the dank herbage to his fevered brow. At first he felt recovered, but in a few minutes strong spasms shot through his frame, and these yielded to a feebleness that forced him to sink to the ground when he endeavored to rise. He forgot his situation, the near abbey, his friends. He forgot wherefore, but he remembered that his presence was required somewhere, and with a resolved effort he rose and staggered towards his horse. He fell. "A little sleep, and I shall be well." This was his last thought, and he lay in a state between slumber and stupor upon the earth. Chapter 48. Capture of Catherine. "If the dull substance of my flesh were thought, injurious distance should not stop my way. For then, despite of space, I would be brought to limits far remote, where thou dost stay." Shakespeare. There is a terror whose cause is unrevealed even to its victim, which makes the heart beat wildly, and we ask the voiceless thing wherefore. When the beauty of the visible universe sickens the aching sense, when we beseech the winds to comfort us, and we implore the invisible for relief which is to speed to us from afar, we endeavor, in our impotent struggle with the sense of coming evil, to soar beyond the imprisoning atmosphere of our own identity. We call upon the stars to speak to us, and would fain believe that Mother Earth, with inorganic voice, prophesies. Driven on by the mad imaginings of a heart hovering between life and death, we fancy that the visible frame of things is replete with oracles. Or is it true, and do air and earth, divined by the sorrow-tutored spirit, possess true auguries? At such dread hour we are forced to listen and believe, nor can we ever afterwards, in common life, forget our miserable initiation into the mysteries of the unexplained laws of our nature. To one thus aware of the misfortune that awaits her, the voice of consolation is a mockery. Yet, even while she knows that the die is cast, she will not acknowledge her intimate persuasion of ill, but sits smiling on any hope brought to her, as a mother on the physician who talks of recovery while her child dies.